And so, please keep coming. As we welcome the team forward, Elizabeth, who's come all the way from Tonga country, from Tonga, is going to speak to us a little bit about yourself. So, some of the people here will be aware of what you're doing, but what you're doing isn't just regional, it's global.
Gosh, wow.
Do you want to fill us in? What have you been up to?
Yes, thank you. Malo lele, kia ora, whaka alofa atu, everyone. I'm very honoured to be here and to sit among a very impressive line of panellists this afternoon. As mentioned, my name is Elizabeth Kite. I founded Tonga's only youth-led non-government organisation, which is called Tonga Youth Leaders. Thank you. We exist to empower youth and amplify their voices. There's more about that on my bio. I'm also the Pacific Regional Representative in the Commonwealth Youth Council. The Commonwealth Youth Council is the official youth body for the Commonwealth heads of government, representing the 1.2 billion young people across the Commonwealth. So instead of repeating what's written in my bio, and because of Josiah's very strict time guidelines, I've actually tried to narrow down everything as much as possible. So I actually wanted to just focus on youth leadership, because I'm what you call a youth leader. What this means is a myriad of things, but I'd like to first highlight what we are not, because these are continued errors that continue to happen but need to stop immediately. We are not a box to check off a list to show that your organisation is being inclusive. We are not uninterested or unbothered in matters concerning our nation and region. And we are not voices and leaders of tomorrow. What we are leaders of today who care to take charge of the future that we will inherit, and we actually bring great value as individuals, especially in terms of innovation to combat the issues that we face. A great example to show is while our world leaders, are very slow to address the prevalent issue today, which is climate change, our young leaders, Brianna for an example, are the ones taking action on the ground and in the communities with our people day in, day out, and can I add, most of them do it without being paid. I'd also like to highlight what the Deputy Prime Minister said earlier this morning about young people and youth leadership. He said a new generation of Pacific leaders are emerging to help advance and collect solutions for the issues our region face. And with this new leadership group, we need to encourage with all that we have, because we need them. And as young leaders, we need you too. To see us not only as the majority of the population for our region, but as equal partners in achieving national, regional, and global goals, and also addressing the issues that we face as well. That's it from me.
Woo! 49 seconds to go. Well done.
Oh.
First person on time today. No, I was kidding. Ali, brother, you're down in Porirua in Wellington region. Tell us about what you get up to.
Okay. Whakalawhalai atu kia mutolo otsi ko Ali Liotta he hingo aku e monuia e wha I tapu e whangahau niue. So happy Niue Language Week everyone. I'm Ali Liotta, or Ali Liotta on Twitter. I'm not Niuean, but I'm a proud Samoan from the villages of Mulifungoa, Apulimayuta, and Letonga on my dad's side, and then Nofoli on my mum's side. I was born in Dunedin, so I'm a proud Highlander supporter. Me and Josiah there. But I was raised in this place called Paradise, as Josiah mentioned before, Porirua. I wear multiple hats, and I'm here on behalf of the Brown Caucus. Quite a catchy name. I'll tell you a little bit about Brown Caucus. I'm from Porirua. Porirua has a population of around 50-odd thousand. 44% of the population is under 30. I'm one of them. And 26% of the population is Pacific, and then 22 Māori. So Porirua is young and brown. And our group, we're just a group of friends, both Pacific and Māori, who are really keen to ensure our voice is considered on decision making. And some of the biggest ones we've had is the Fair Affairs campaign. Like here in Auckland, there's a tertiary student fair for tertiary students here in Auckland. In Wellington, we didn't have one until last year. They had a campaign running in town, run by Palangi brothers and sisters, and they're only campaigning for $2 bus fares. But for me, I drove from Poriro to Wellington every day, and it cost me $90 a week, and that's half of my student allowance. And then the rest of it, I'm scraping the bottom of the barrel. And we just shared our stories and held our local candidates and councillors accountable, and we showed them a real reality of the issues that our young Pacific people face in Poriro. And by our collective voices, 2017, almost 2 years to the date, on the 30th of October, we were voted 12-1 to introduce a tertiary student fare public transport. So I was spending $90 a week, and now I only pay $40 a week to get to class. So that's a big thing for not just myself, but Pacific people and future generations. It's going to come study in Wellington. And then another hat I wear is that I'm the National Pacifica Liaison for the New Zealand Union of Students Associations, and we're the voice of students in tertiary education. And this year's our 90th anniversary, and part of the 90th anniversary, we're building a national voice for Pacific students. So this work started back in 1999 by now Whanana Efeso Collins, the Auckland City Councillor. Him and Dr. Nuhisifa Williams, they initiated Pacific Student Whanau and tried to bring together strong Pacific collective student voice across the country. And after 20 years, the past government didn't really favour student voice and introduced voluntary student membership. Student voice went broke, and with that, Pacific Student Voice died. So from 1999 to 2011, Pacific Student Voice have been meeting quite regularly, but just this year, after 8 years, we brought back the Pacific Student Whanau, and at the moment we're electing our new and first ever national executive to lead Pacific Student Voice across Aotearoa, New Zealand. And this morning we talked about reset, step up, uplift, elevate, surgical, but this right here, that beautiful table of young people over there, at the back, down here, outside, the 44% of the population in Poriro, and all our young Pacific people across the region, this is the Pacific Wave. And as our brother Koro said here this morning, let's go.
Oh, thank you very much, Ali. It's great to have you with us. And back up to this territory and up here back in Tamaki Makaurau, telling our stories on the airwaves, something maybe you didn't expect to start doing. Tell us a little bit about how you're doing what you're doing, Mabel.
Yeah, malo lele, everybody. Ko Kinga ko Mabel Muller. I'm of Tongan descent, and I'm very humbled and privileged to be among honourable ministers and other government officials here in the room, and very blessed to be alongside some amazing young people. I'm afraid I don't have success stories like they do, but I do have the huge responsibility of controlling the platform that enables their voices to be heard. I work as a producer for the morning show on 531 PI that's been around for 25 years. It started as a grassroots community radio station and is now a national radio station, publicly funded, with 9 Pacific languages, and I think it's all part of Pacific connectivity. Most of our language programs have crossovers back to the islands, which we know, is a huge thing for our elders and our kaumatuas here in New Zealand, knowing what's happening back at home. And that's where I'm currently working, and here I am representing media who have been heavily criticised today, which I am well aware of. And I'm positive that I will be part of the changing media narrative going into the future. So thank you for having me, Melanie, and NZIIA, and I'm looking forward to all of your questions.
Oh, beautiful. Welcome. And down the end to the mainland, where I'm very proud to live as well. Oki Rano Taulaya. Oki is one of the trustees in PYLAT, who I work a little bit alongside. But you've done some phenomenal things the last couple of years. Yeah, tell the team a little bit about what you get up to.
Talofa lava, malo elele, nisa bulvanaka, Maori, Kiorana, and warmest Pacific greetings. Whaftaima nea wanoa, and momona avilvi ina lea tua, wau lea nea so matanoa fiat. It is an honor to be up here with individuals with such mana and inspiration. So my name is Okirano Tilea. I was born and raised in Christchurch. I have 2 younger brothers, 4 and 15, but I'm still hoping for a sister one day. And my favorite food's kokolesa. Has anyone had kokolesa before? Yeah. I've been fortunate enough to be appointed several roles, including Minister Hipkins' Youth Advisory Group, Deputy Chair of PYLAT Pacific Youth Leadership and Transformation, and appointed head boy at Kashmir High School for 2019. But I think the most important title I have is being the son of Tile and Christina Fialele, my parents. My parents brought me up with three pillars that I believe are important in Samoan culture: alofa, falualo, and tautua: love, respect, and service. My parents made sure that there was food on the table, clothes on our backs, and a roof over our heads. No matter how tough times got, they always lended a hand to others. They put others before themselves. I'm going to be completely honest. I'd say my family's really rich. Not rich in money, but rich in love, rich in compassion, and rich in happiness. Growing up, like many other Pacifica young people, I faced struggles around identity. Many had asked me what I wanted to be and then told me what not to be. Somehow we must become what we are not, sacrificing who we are to inherit the masquerade of who we will be. We were being told to stand up for ourselves, but that's hard to do when we don't know who we are. And I was either acting too white to be brown or too brown to be white. And as I went through high school, I met some amazing people, and they helped me explore who I am. And a few years ago, I recently joined PYLAT, and I've loved every single minute of it. And because of that, I've been able to learn so many new things and develop my own skills, but also give back to my community and to the young people. I've not only grown so much as a young person, but as a Pacifica young person. And because of that, I was able to confidently lead a huge student vigil after the terrible events of the 15th, and really step out of my comfort zone and show not only New Zealand, but the world who we as young Pacifica people can really do. But yeah, that's just a little bit about me, and yeah, thank you, Whaftai LeVa.
Well, that's who we've got. These are the four of the diaspora of our journeying, our navigating families. Yeah, this is quite exciting. I've got 4 questions, but I thought just quickly, I'd tell you something from my life, because I'm kind of like, maybe a lot of you won't quite know who I am, and it's a bit awkward. You want to feel like you know the facilitator maybe. So I think the thing that's most important was Dad came here in '87 to send support back to our family. When I was young, I didn't quite understand that, and I used to think of that being as something which I felt he was somehow neglecting us. As I got older, I had the opportunity to understand what it meant to be a Samoan New Zealander, and to actually be comfortable and confident and celebrate that. And then, as Oki mentioned, that ended up changing the course of our lives, because we founded something together, and now we're growing Pacific youth leadership in this country, because that's, as Oki has referenced, and as all the stories have referenced, this is what we need in every single part of the country. But I guess what I really want to talk about in this couple of minutes is what made the real difference for me in my journey so far, is how our Pacific values probably saved my life. So I ended up being on the panel for the government inquiry into mental health addiction. The previous 6 months to that, I had dropped out of university. It was reported that I had taken time off study to kind of go and do this piece of work. I was really, really unwell. But it was our family who loved me back into wellness. And I haven't really talked much about this until now, but I guess what I want to say is, our values in our mental health and well-being are the values our country needs in our mental health and well-being systems. And that saved me and many others. And there's 20,000 of us at any one time who are considering not wanting to live anymore. And in New Zealand generally, and Pacific males are more likely to die by suicide than by road accidents. We know the challenge, and in the climate challenge and all these things, we just have to drill deeper into our identity, into our connection. That's the things that ultimately saved my life and made me well, and got me ready to be able to understand the depth of the pain across New Zealand. And so, just as we go to hear from the team, there's 3 pages in this report. It's called Vai Nu, which talks about the refreshing coconut water that that we need in our system to deliver mental health and well-being for Pacific young people and all Pacific people, but actually just for our Pacific region too. So if New Zealand and Foreign Affairs could live by new and live that well-being framework, I think then we would prevent suicide, we'd increase mental well-being in a way that we don't currently. So that's a little bit about me. What we're going to do, as I say, we've got one question for each of our team. And we're going to start off by talking to Ali. Ali, we know that, we've heard from you, your background is in empowering young people in education. If you were to describe to us what your vision for education would be to support Pacific young people and students, what would that be?
Part of the work we're doing with Tavita Pacifica, the National Voice for Pacific Students, is we've gone across the country and working with not just universities and politics, but ITOs and so forth. And the common thing that's come across is the big vision for us is a barrier-free education. A lot of times our own people put barriers up for themselves to actually get into education itself. And there's multiple factors. And I talked about transport, the access, physical access. And we just rallied together and shared our stories and got across that. But I want to zone in on one particular issue is from the day that you enroll to the day that you graduate, we ensure that Pacific students in education are empowered and that they have improved experiences. And one big thing that has come across to mind is a lot of literature, research reports out there currently underpinned by Pacific underachievement, and that can demoralize a lot of Pacific students. And when we look at that, we just don't see ourselves in these institutions and so forth. But we need to reframe that narrative, as was mentioned today, change the mindset and so forth, and actually appreciate the things that we do bring to the education space. And we've got awesome educators and academics in this room who have done the hard yards and try to change that narrative. But some of our own young people have bought into that negative or deficit stereotypes of, I don't want to be another statistic, and I'm guilty of that. But as I've gone along this journey and identified that, we just actually need to reframe the narrative. And sometimes I know people in the Pacific region look up to Aotearoa, New Zealand, but for this particular issue, we need to look up to our Pacific region and see the values that they have, like Alofa Tautua, Inati from Tokelau, they're the One Talk system and so forth. So if we can look up to those and how we can embed those in education, particularly with the current reforms, that will enable a lot of our people to have a barrier-free education.
Well, there we go. Has everyone got the prescription for education down? Cool, okay. The prescription for foreign affairs. So you walk between Australia and Tonga, offering both countries deep insights into how they can work in the Pacific and work in Tonga. Describe what needs to happen. What do we need to see from foreign affairs in the Pacific?
Thank you, Josiah. I just actually wanted to know, while I have the stage, is anyone here from Australia? Because I've been introduced to... Oh, okay, so there's a couple. Okay.
But I don't have an Australian hat on.
Okay, all right. Anyone here with their Australian hat on? Okay, one person. Wonderful. It's great to have you here. It's really important that in these dialogues we're inclusive of absolutely every single person in the Pacific, and I find that Australia is always left out. And that's the first thing that we need to do, make sure we're including Australia. So, Josiah, thank you. Firstly, the space of youth development and leadership is absolutely no easy feat, and nobody should ever think that coming in it'll be a breeze. The work that we do, although very fulfilling, is, for me personally, often more difficult than it is fun. But difficult, though, doesn't mean that nothing is being done. I entered the Commonwealth youth development and leadership space in perhaps the most interesting time, which was only a couple of years ago, where it is very politically heated, and most of the Commonwealth member nations are the first to face the effects of the existential crisis of climate change, among other issues. So I'm going to focus solely on this particular issue because it is the most pressing issue that our region face. Climate change has actually created a barrier somewhat between Australia and its Pacific Island neighbours. So much so that I personally have even, experience some of these barriers, and it's simply because I sound Australian. I did receive an education there, and so that explains my accent. Yeah, and this is all due to those in charge of governing their country. And to be completely honest, I understand the feel towards, that a lot of these young Pacific people feel towards me because of Australia's current political stand on climate change. So anyway, with the climate crisis, it's been a really interesting world to navigate in the Pacific region right now, to bridge the gap that for me seems to be increasing. And that serves absolutely nobody in our region. So while Australia has pledged to step up in our Pacific region, what we see as those inheriting the future that their coal damages isn't remotely close to what actually needs to be done. In order for Australia to really step up in our region, they need to do more on the front of climate change and help us save our homes. The excuse that they're the Pacific's largest donor is overused and actually proves nothing other than that they have money to give to issues, to counter issues that they are actually helping create. For an example, their coal. In the same breath, though, Tonga and other Pacific nations also need to step up. Like the Deputy Prime Minister this morning said, these issues are very serious. What we must stop doing is being so complacent in the Pacific, which is what I think we continuously do. We need to act and realize our worth and value in this present moment. We are in a time where our voices as Pacific are so needed to be heard by the rest of the world, because while world leaders are planning for the future, we in the Pacific are living it. We're already there. We're already losing our homes, our livelihoods, and we're already facing the consequences that come from the extreme weather conditions of the Pacific, of climate change, sorry. And like many of the Pacific climate activists say, one of them, again, I'm going to acknowledge Brianna Fruin, if you save the Pacific, you save the world. So for me, youth leaders and youth in general are very desperate to work more collaboratively, but the barrier that we face as young leaders is our actual leaders aren't giving us that space to do it. Australia must recognise its responsibility here, and Pacific Island nations need to realise that Australia isn't just there for money. We need a true and genuine friendship and understanding and respect between each other for our needs. Because with all due respect to my late king, George Dubois V, our generation, I truly believe, will be sure to make small nations start writing our own policies. So to wrap it all up, in my opinion, we all need to reset and step up our game because we have a future to save and lives as well. And to do that, we need to start properly bridging the gap between our nations, particularly Australia and its Pacific Island neighbours.
Getting the right people in the room. Not giving up on people.
No, I think that's a common theme here is unity in everything that we do. Yeah.
Okay, we'll come back to that. And platform sharing, I heard you reference as well, which is kind of something I'm keen for us to unpack. So to the media and the work that you do, you get to profile and lift the stories of Pacific young people, and at the same time, you'll have noticed the stories that are coming out about Pacific young people. Have there been any changes in the volume of Pacific youth stories or the content over the time you've been curating them?
Yeah, I think yes. When I look back to when I was growing up, I hardly saw, or maybe it's because I was most of the time I was playing outside, but I hardly saw stories of people that looked like me, and stories from people who look like me. And I think we've seen a huge increase in more Pacific representation in media, which we know is really important because we have a different worldview. And sometimes telling our stories is more than just reporting facts. You know, we've got to take into consideration that cultural worldview. And what I've noticed with youth and the youth voice, I've approached a few young people, students, young kids on the street for stories and for interviews. And it's funny how they respond to media is like, oh, I don't really know how to talk. You answer it. And then they sort of like pass it on to their friends, like, oh, you answer, you got the big words. And like, I feel like sometimes I just say, but guys, we just want to hear your voice. You don't have to say anything, like we just talk. That's all you have to do. And it's sad because I feel like they're like that because of the way that they see media. We project like a very Western format of reporting that when it does come to the time to like for them to speak up, they feel incompetent or don't feel maybe qualified enough to speak. But I think that's the privilege of being in media and being a Pacific representative in media is showing our young people that your voice is important, no matter how you project it. It's important, it's relevant, and you have a place in New Zealand, therefore we need to hear it. We need to hear your voice. And I think the impact of getting more Pacific positive stories is that our young people can see that. They're now empowered, they're inspired to speak up more often. And sometimes they don't wait for traditional media to approach them to speak up. You can see it on social media. If they see something that they're passionate about, they will make noise. And Pacific Climate Warriors is a huge example of that. And even other platforms like Elizabeth's Tonga youth leaders have their own platform called Liotta, telling the stories of our young people. I know PYLAT is constantly sharing stories of young people, Navigators of Success, so many platforms on social media who aren't waiting for mainstream media or for any media to tell their stories. Now they're just like, okay, if you don't want to hear our story, we're just going to tell it ourselves. Which I believe is the huge change that we're seeing in the youth voice, particularly in New Zealand, but across the region as well, because like in my line of work, I see that there are issues back at home that don't necessarily don't have a direct impact on our Pacific people here in New Zealand, but because it's in the Pacific, because it's Pacific related, they care, and so they'll make noise about it here as well, which I think speaks volumes about the connectivity and how we feel obliged as a people to our islands back at home. And just coming back to the more media stories on Pacific, I feel like the more we see positive Pacific stories, the more we see our narratives being told the way we want it, the more it empowers and inspires our young people to have a say, to prioritize what they say, and to call forums out when they don't acknowledge their voices. So that's the answer to that question.
Oh, no, thank you. And I think that's something I'm keen for us to explore after we've heard from Oki. But like we know that Facebook, if we take one platform for example, is mostly an over 40s platform. And we know that adults typically don't use Facebook the best way to get their messages out there. If you're wanting to have real impact on Facebook, by the way, you have to create a share chain. That's the most useful way. It's not likes and it's shares. And so those kinds of things that we know young people just typically know, or where the platforms are typically on, like Instagram, Snapchat, or whatever else, and the ways they're just finding a way to tell these stories, we have to all harness as a community to then be able to tell our stories in a broader way. So thank you. Oki, the young people that you're working with, the young people from the climate strikes that you connect to, the March 15 vigils, all of the different spaces you're in, what are the key messages that Pacific young people want leaders like the leaders in this room to hear?
So I was fortunate enough to, I'm fortunate enough to have the chance to hear views and perspectives from Pacifica young people, not only in New Zealand, but in the Pacific as well, when I visited Samoa earlier this year. And from looking from a New Zealand lens, I talked about it before, there's an identity crisis. It comes up every Pacific conference. We know that having a sense of belonging is tied so closely to success. And I think the message around identity that young people want Pacific leaders and decision makers to know is that it's a very simple message. They just want you guys to claim them as Pacifica. We want to be claimed as Samoan. We want to be claimed as Fijian. We want to be claimed as Tongan and Pacifica. You know, we talk about raising young Pasifika success, and yet institutes in New Zealand, for example, there's universities that don't accept and acknowledge Fijian Indians as being Pasifika, and that takes them out and creates a barrier in terms of scholarships. So you're basically contradicting yourself. You're saying that, you know, it is important for young Pasifika people to know their identity and be confident in who they are, yet you deny them that right to claim themselves as young Pasifika. And also, I'd like to raise a message around consultation and having young Pasifika people in decision making, around partnerships. You know, as the speaker said before, you know, if we're not at the table, then we're on the menu. And with identity and knowing who you are, there is an imbalance around, you know, if you can't speak the language, then you're not Samoan enough. You know, if you haven't been to the islands, you're not Samoan enough. If you don't eat taro or bisupo, you're not Samoan enough. And that's what young people have in their thoughts every day. And we need to change those mindsets and attitudes around those issues. And around consultation, as decision makers and Pacific leaders, we don't want the consultations that we have with young people to be tokenistic. We don't want it to be just ticking boxes or making a quota. You know, we want authentic and genuine relationships. There's a Māori saying, and it translates as, what is the most important thing in life? It is the people, the people, the people. And I think that's so important when we are, as Pacific leaders, connecting with our young people. It's building those relationships, building that common ground. And another thing is, young people look up to you guys. They aspire to be like yous. You know, when we see brown faces in STEM, in science, in mathematics, academia, it really boosts our confidence. And I think young Pasifika people want to see you guys on the ground, in the communities, face to face. You know, we don't want you as Pasifika leaders just reading, you know, our opinions and views off a piece of paper. We actually want to see you guys face to face. I hope I'm not taking too much time, but when I went to Samoa, I collaborated with journalism students from the National University of Samoa, and we created a documentary around young people's experiences and views. And one story I'd like to share is a girl I met. She's year 13 and she attends Avele College in Samoa. And while I was talking to her, I asked her, you know, so what are your plans for next year? What are your aspirations? And she said, the main goal I have is to finish high school and actually go overseas and get a good degree. But the thing is, she started crying and she said, but I want to come back. I want to provide my family and get a degree that helps me stand up for the injustices that are happening in the Pacific. And then I have me crying behind the camera, and I ask her, so what is the major challenge that is in the way of you reaching your and attaining your goal? And she said she feels the young people in Samoa feel so distant from the Pacific leaders, you know, between the decision makers. You know, she doesn't feel that connectivity with the government, people in authority. And I think it's so important that we build a sense of connectivity, not only in New Zealand, but in the Pacific.
And New Zealand, yeah, absolutely. If you sorry to interrupt those who wanted to clap, but yeah, exactly. And our New Zealand leaders can do that as well in the Pacific. And I know they've been increasing their engagement, but is it built into every program to visit schools? Is it built into every program to spend time with national youth councils and other youth and children's mechanisms? Yeah, very important. Thanks, Oki. Okay, so to the questions on the board for the final half an hour. Great. So we've got first one up. What would you recommend to other young leaders in navigating the pressures imposed by seeming too young by colleagues or others. Is there anyone who would like to kick off with that question? They're also up there if that's easier to read them. Oh, there we go. Yeah, please, Elizabeth.
I guess this is something that I guess we've all encountered, so we can all answer this. But honestly, my mentors say this over and over again to me, and I repeat this over and over again to the people that I mentor as well. Do not take criticism from people who you wouldn't take advice from. If they're being critical of you being too young in these spaces, then they perhaps don't see your value, and so then they don't matter. That's my opinion in it. And so I advise you, just have confidence in yourself, and if you have a voice, use it. Everyone's voice has value. So, yeah.
I'm a positive person, and I like to reframe the narrative again. And they say you're too young, but I referred to the whakatauki, no te roro, nāku te roro, kaurai te iwi. So with your basket of knowledge and my basket of knowledge, the people will prosper. So that's straightforward for me, just working together in partnership. And that's how I see, just to release that pressure. And that's my advice.
Personally, for me, I think it comes back to who we are. It comes back to our values and our roots. Yeah, and I just totally just had a mind blank. Oh yes, there is this quote, and it says, "Our actions define who we are, but it's actually who we are that defines our actions." And yeah, so whenever it comes to criticism, I always come back to who I am. I always come back to my ancestors. The ancestors who traveled the world, navigating the world. But yeah.
I think living in New Zealand, living in two worlds, young people are already navigating other pressures, other social issues that perhaps are much larger than our age. But I think as Pacific young people, it's harder for us because one, we're young, then second, we're Pacific. So first we have to fight to be a Pacific at the table, and then Pacific and young at the table. And I think even in a Pacific context, working in a Pacific workplace, sometimes it's hard for me to have my say because I feel, I want to respect my elders and those older than me. But I think there needs to it comes back to our values of that va, or that relationship building. I earn your respect if you earn mine, you know what I mean? Like, I give respect in order to get respect back. And then, that's my approach to it. That's how I approach it in my workplace. I'm just speaking practically. For me as a young Pacific person, it's giving respect and then in turn hoping that they would also give respect back, and then working together like that.
I'm really glad you raised that, because I guess in setting up our trust in Christchurch, we didn't, for a start, we didn't host the program that then inspired us to do that. To go back and to acknowledge Rajeli Nicole, if she's still here. No, Rajeli Nicole and her husband Robert, they set up the PYLAT program, Pacific Youth Leadership and Transformation, in 2010. But it was the Pacific community and it was the government who said Pacific youth leadership is important and opened the door and made it safe for us to critique and say things that wouldn't normally be safe to say. And so, in your work environment, the reciprocity and comfortability, we didn't initiate that. The door was opened, and then over time, we've proven that it's safe and can be trusted for us to share our voice in that way. So I think particularly with that, some of it is culturally we want to do it properly, and on the other side, some of it we have to test but do a happy dance so that it's a little bit of both, because otherwise we lose who we are, I think. So that, yeah. But to go to the next one, so what are some of the examples of new employment and leadership opportunities in the Pacific and for Pacific people in Aotearoa? New employment and leadership opportunities. Yeah?
This one's coming up. It's my current. Sorry, can you hear me? This one's actually coming up next year for leadership roles. My position as the Pacific Regional Representative actually opens up next June to any young Pacific person. You can run your election, and also the Pacific will be taking the position of chair as well, which I've been suggesting to some of the young leaders here to try and run for. So that's one. I don't know if there are any more.
But just before we go to those, and please, there is something particular that New Zealand needs to think about in terms of this. Is now
Yes.
the time to possibly say it?
Very true. I wish the Deputy Prime Minister was here still. So the New Zealand, isn't actually in the Commonwealth Youth Program. Every other Commonwealth nation is in the youth program. It's a very big issue for me, especially as a Pacific representative, that the country I was born in isn't in there, but also the country that has so many Pacific Islanders as well as Tongans. I think the largest population outside of Tonga actually resides here in New Zealand. Isn't a part of this Commonwealth Youth Program, and that actually limits young people from many opportunities. So this is something I'm trying to work on with the New Zealand government right now to give back that opportunity, because it's really, I'll be honest, I spoke with the Australians and saw how much you guys paying to actually be a part of it, and they're like, it's seriously nothing for us, and it'd be the same for New Zealand. So I think that's correct. It's not much money to actually have your membership reactivated. So yeah.
So New Zealand, not New Zealand. I'm being a bit preemptive. So the Pacific will be the chair next year.
Yes.
And there's an opportunity for New Zealand to join in time for that. Okay.
Yes.
We'll leave that with people in the room to think about. Others, leadership opportunities, employment opportunities that you're wondering. Yeah.
Oh, great.
Going back to Paradise and Puriro, and one thing that has been developing is with the refugee quota and more refugees coming into our communities and being resettled in places like Puriro. So I live in Cannons Creek. My neighbours are Colombians. They've been in Puriro for about 5 years. And with them settling into our communities, they're becoming more and more Pacific. A lot of our families empathise with them because the jobs that they're taking up are the jobs that our people had when they first came to Aotearoa, New Zealand. And we relate to them on 3 things. We're tau iwi from Aotearoa, New Zealand. Obviously, we live in the same communities. And lastly, we're big in faith. So our spirituality is vital. And a lot of Colombians are big believers, are big faith-driven and are Catholics. And one of the local Catholic schools in Puriro, Bishop Via College, there's more Colombians than Palangi and Māori. And the biggest population is Pacific. So, and with that, the Pacific young people are taking Colombian students under their wing and I guess mentoring them like a tōkana tēnā approach. And more so our grandparents are welcoming them into our communities and even into our churches. And even their kids, grandkids are enrolling to our aonga matas. So that's a new leadership phase that's happening in our communities, and Pacific people are going to be the leaders and looking after our refugee communities because we can relate a lot better to them than anyone else.
Wow.
And that definitely is what we saw in terms of your leadership, Oki, and generally Pacific peoples after the mosque terror attacks, is just we instinctively know what to do. Aotearoa draw on us. No, I'm really grateful you mentioned that, Ali. What I'm going to do is just read the rest of the questions on the screen, and anyone can respond to any of them, because that way we might, we've got about 20 minutes or maybe just a little bit less. So what are the significant barriers facing young Pacific people around the inclusion of their voices, knowledge, expertise in leadership and decision-making processes? Maybe if you do choose that one, you might think about what are the solutions to some of the barriers. How can true digital connectivity enable young Pacific social impact and business leaders to be more influential and connected in the region? Do our Pacific cultures give space and a platform for youth leadership and voice? And what does the strategic competition Deputy Prime Minister Peter's referenced mean for youth in the Pacific? So, any of the questions available? Is there anyone who wants to answer any of them? Sure.
I'll start with the first one, around the barriers and about inclusion of our voice. I'm going to be positive again and start with solutions-based. Obviously, I'm reflecting on student voice. Student voice currently is not legitimised and under-resourced, but one thing we'd like to see is having more support and more partnering up and so forth But the biggest thing for us is they're having Pacific seats on all these councils and so forth, but we need to see some action and help us back that up with training, resourcing, and actually working with us. So that's one area here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, that needs to be worked on. It is student voice, and we always talk about we want to see our own people in the driver's seat, and student voice is a fundamental platform to help build onto that. So if we can invest in our student voice, then we could have more ministers that are Pacific and more of our MPs and even more councils across Aotearoa, New Zealand, and even in the Pacific as well. So some student voice support would be grateful.
One moment. I think that particular point is one of the most useful things that we need to understand in the room. Is it's about practicing decision making. And in Pacific context, there might not always be the space to practice decision making, or particular Pacific young people are mentored to move into maybe matai or other leadership roles. We're trying to democratise that and build that out so that we broaden those opportunities. So that's I really, really value that. And we can use some of the Western structures as you're talking about the school boards, school trustee position at school council, uni positions, trustee, all da. Yeah, thank you, Ali. What were you going to say?
Just in terms of barriers, I'll just speak on what we found at Tonga Youth Leaders. I think one of the biggest barrier that we face as young people to have our voices heard or acknowledged or recognised is a communication barrier between ourselves and the leaders that we have, whether they're traditional or national. And so what we've done as the solution to this at Tonga Youth Leaders is we host a monthly tala noa. We look back to our values, which is what we use to guide us in everything that we do, and we practice what we traditionally do, which is we communicate. We sit down in tala noa. So tala noa in Tonga means, tala means to talk and to speak. Noa means to be silent, and that's when you listen. But that's only done, it's reciprocated. So that's the process of a tala noa session. These young emerging leaders get to speak to our national leaders in these tala noa sessions. And so then we are bridging that gap, that disconnect between our leaders and our young, to formulate solutions together for the issues that young people are most passionate about. So I would say that that's the biggest barrier that young people face, is there's a communication barrier there. Our leaders don't know that we're interested as young people, that we want to take, part in whatever they're doing in governing our country. And and we as young people don't know that our leaders actually want to hear from us. Yeah, so...
Can you film this and you distribute this on TV?
So yes, we also have taken it further. We don't only just host monthly tala noa sessions. We have a weekly TV program with our National TV Broadcasting Commission, a monthly radio program as well. So we're really amplifying the voices of young people and having them heard across our nation. Yeah.
Beautiful. What do either of you two like to... Yeah.
I'd just like to tautoko what everyone else has said around communication, but also networking. As personally for me, I don't think I'd be here if people and decision makers, didn't actually reach out to me and actually ask me what I thought. And actually put, made a seat for me at the table. And I think it helps when Pacific leaders partner with groups like PYLAT and all those Pacific Leaders Council, because it creates a common ground when reaching out to young people. Young people have so much potential and so many aspirations. They just need that that sense of Pacific leaders and decision makers reaching out to them. But yeah,
because I like that too. Because in a Balangi Western perspective, it would be that a Pacific young person would be an individual. They know that they've got equality, freedom of expression, definition of success. Whereas what you're talking about is like we know we're deeply connected. We are learning from each other at the same time. It's like one of our Samoan leaders in Christchurch. Sam Utai talks about as Pacific young people mentoring adults and being mentored at the same time. It's like recognising that there's the dual exchange rather than young people being vessels to be filled instead. So, yeah, good thing to brought up.
I'd like to touch on do our Pacific cultures give space and a platform for the youth voice and leadership? Only because I work on a platform that provides space for voices to be heard. I think there's an increasing awareness of how important the youth voice is from our older generation. Take an example, the Niue Youth Network, which is an initiative that the Wangahau Niue Trust began because they realized our language is dying, our young people aren't engaging with our culture. We need to give it to them to be the driving force behind, preserving that. And it's really taken off. We spoke with the chairperson this week on our program, and just to see how much the Niue Youth Network has grown over the past few years and the support that they get from the older generation shows how valued they are, and shows that our older generation is really starting to create a space or to allow us to take initiatives and to lead initiatives, to basically drive sort of the preservation of culture and language here in Aotearoa, which I think is we need more of.
That's quite cool you mentioned Niue, and I visited Niue recently, and their Niuean Youth Council were gifted a piece of land by their government a number of years ago, and they've turned that into a social enterprise. Sorry, this is a bit of a tangent that I just thought of while we were talking about Niue. They've given an economic asset to then enable youth voice by having these young people able to cultivate that, and now they physically use the land for growing things, but then also the facilities in Airbnb, and they're earning the income off that to then feed into their youth projects. Like when we're thinking about how we empower youth voice and what Niuean young people are doing, we have to also think about a new way of funding it, and we don't necessarily have to get government funding in the long term. Maybe it's a short term thing like a piece of land. Now in the Tongan context, all Tongan young people have the right to own land through the family connections and things.
Males.
Oh,
women,
I'm so sorry to all the Tongan women and to everyone else. I haven't done my homework.
We can lease as females.
So in that context, which is now very awkward, everyone, that I screwed that up, I just acknowledge the truthfulness of how badly I've missed that. That kind of nuance and knowing those things are things we can draw on in some way, shape or form in your context. But hopefully, with that, me being now aware of that, to the Tongan leaders here and across the region, if that can change, that would be something that would be significant.
It would be, but also there is very good reason for why women actually don't have access to land, and it comes down to how we run as a society and culture. Culturally, women, it's just how our society functions. We have an understanding, and it's through this talanoa process that we don't actually need to own land by law to have access to land. It's a very Western understanding of, whether it's right or wrong. But I mean, there's arguments for and against, and I don't really want to get into that right now.
And I now see how, my balanginess and Aotearoa's things, I've got to work on. So I appreciate that schooling. Other things on the screen that anyone else wants to quickly touch on? We've got about, I think, 5 minutes.
Just real quickly on Pacific cultures and celebrating it. We all know about Pacific Language Weeks, but I want to encourage you guys to push Pacific language and culture, so that we're not just celebrating it for one week a year, but we're celebrating it every day. And this is something I've seen with Te Reo Māori, and it's so great. It's so great to see the increasing awareness and celebration of Te Reo and our tangata whenua. And I hope that it comes to our Pacific communities as well.
Very good. So I'm just looking to see if there's any new questions coming forward. There's only one, it seems. So apart from anything else, you're wanting to respond to the rest of that, intergenerational challenges, how do we get the communication flowing or address those? That's probably the last question, I think, before we round off.
Maybe I can touch on this, because I think this is a problem that I think Pacific young people have, is that we misinterpret respect and whakaapa, if you're going to say it in Tongan. We say it's disrespectful to speak to our elders and things like that, whereas actually you're being very respectful by taking ownership of your future and having these dialogues with your elders. So I think we need to change that mentality, because a lot of the time when I speak to my leaders, they're very grateful and thankful that finally someone young has come and spoken to us, and taken the initiative to do that. So I mean, I just want to say, sorry, I kind of lost track of the question. So the challenge is our understanding of what's respectful and what's not. I think we need to change that because we're often thinking as young people, oh, I'm going to be disrespectful if I voice my opinion. No, actually, you're just taking ownership of the future that is yours, but with the lessons learned from your elders. And that's actually a very respectful act. I think it's about your perspective there. Yeah.
Sounds a little bit like a microcosm of what you were talking about for me earlier, the navigating the different spaces. So yeah. Others who want to comment on that or anything else? No? Okay, well, to finish the panel, we're going to have a 1 minute quick fire final thought. Yep, sorry, I know I didn't prep you on this, but I just thought we'll use the amount of time that's left to leave something, leave a taonga behind. So who started us off? We started sort of this way, so we're going to start on this side. But just but pretty much 1 minute, what would you say to the room? No, it doesn't have to be too much or too little, it's just, what are you thinking?
Food at the moment, but I think what I'm thinking right now is you guys as Pacific leaders and decision makers play a huge part in young people's lives, especially for Pasifika, and I really want to push that for you guys not to take it for granted, and that our Pasifika young people, we talk about look into the future and the challenges for the future, but as Pasifika young people, we're facing challenges now, and we need your support and encouragement and mentorship. But yeah.
My final thought would be actually a quote that I saw on Twitter, which is a very, very millennial thing to say, a quote. We used to see quotes back in encyclopedias and books in the past, but now we see it on social media as well. I mean, in my platform of media, but also it can be translated to everybody's platforms because you all have a platform and you're all decision makers and you're all consultants or should be consulting with people. But for me, the quote that I hold close to my heart is, "Don't speak for the voiceless, just pass the mic."
I love that. Thanks, Mabel. Pressure's on. My final thoughts are just, we're all leaders here. Let us be guided by values. I think we need to see more values-based leadership moving forward. That's definitely how Tonga youth leaders have been able to accomplish everything that we've done. We're guided by our Tongan values, which is very important to us. So I'll just leave you with that.
I'd say, there's this quote, to lead is not as important as to support. And in this room, all this knowledge that we've soaked in all today is, we don't just keep it in this room and just keep it in our back pocket. We have to go out there and use it. And there's about 150 people here, but our connections go beyond the thousands. So whatever we have nurtured here, whatever we learned from the youth panel to security to climate change, we want to make sure we put those words into action and that we don't have to reinvent the wheel, but dig into our past and look at our values and the systems that we've nurtured for thousands and thousands of years. And I just want to leave you on that note and just reflect on where we come from and use that to head into the future. Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much, all of you. And before we give you a massive round of applause, because what you've all shared has been so valuable. Just if you want to pull out your phones and start looking for the groups that these people are on to continue to follow them, that might be a great use of the next couple of moments. So Ali's from the Brown Caucus, and there's other spaces and places that he leads and influences in. But that one in particular, if I just point out, was one of the most influential submissions that came to the government inquiry in mental health and addiction last year. It was the only group that formed in New Zealand of any Pacific community and also Māori communities to then give a submission, and then the outworking of that and what you've led as a response is phenomenal. So please follow the Brown Caucus. To what Elizabeth leads, I remember having a phone conversation with you a couple of years ago where you were still in Oz after, you've been back and forward, and then you were saying, do I go back and do I start something when the Tongan Youth Parliament has lapsed? I want to run Tongan young women in Parliament as well, and I don't quite know if this is all possible. Yeah. Is it going to be possible? And you've made it happen by navigating that space, and also in a way I think you've borne the brunt of many years of people not making the right choices so that there is a space. And so I want to honour that, you know, you've travelled to be here with us and also what you've done. So please like Tonga young leaders and be aware of what they're doing, because it's reforming how a country involves young people at the deepest level. And what you're doing, Maybelle, and in the way that you know, people might look at your age and say, oh, you're too young to be a producer. You produce one of the most inspiring Pacific broadcasts that happen. Brian brings so much energy to us all, and in a way he validates who we are in every way, but you're the back end to that, and people don't realise that. And so I guess what you show is that as a young person, you know, even if you're not the face of the messages that are leading the change, that we are needed to help shape the messages that need to change. Thank you. And to you, Oki, you know, as a 17-year-old, to kind of just know how to respond in the moment of the deepest crisis that our country has ever faced, when we have never had a terrorism attack to the degree, and you just knew what to do as the head boy of your school, and of all the other ways that you've sacrificed, the way your family has supported you, the personal sacrifice of you with them, and all these other things that you've led. I think in this space, like, we need to acknowledge that and acknowledge what you're all doing and the way you're reframing our countries, and so that we actually get the visibility we need. Thank you for the brunts that you're wearing. Thank you for the hearts that you bring. Thank you for keeping the love alive. So much love to you four, and thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you.